Hashtag the human zookeeper. Part 1. The Galactic Zoo on Kepler Station was considered the most dangerous workplace in known space. Creatures from 1,000 worlds prowl behind force fields that could fail at any moment. The insurance premiums alone bankrupted smaller colonies, and the mortality rate among staff made mining asteroids look like a vacation. Marcus Chun had been working there for 3 standard years, and every alien species had tried to kill him at least once. The Venusian acid spitters had dissolved his protective suit. The crystalline bears from Proxima had shattered his bones with sonic roars. The shadow cats from the void dimensions had given him nightmares that lasted months. But Marcus kept coming back, day after day, with that stupid human smile that made the other species shake their heads in disbelief. The other zookeepers were a mix of hardy species. Croaxians with their thick shells, Zephyrians with their lightning-fast reflexes, and Nethes with their ability to phase through solid matter when threatened. They all thought humans were insane for taking such jobs. Humans had no natural armor, no special abilities, no enhanced strength or speed. They were just soft, pink creatures that somehow survived in the most hostile environments through sheer stubbornness and an inexplicable desire to pet dangerous animals. On this particular morning, Marcus was assigned to the most feared section of the zoo, Sector 7. This was where they kept the apex predators, the creatures so dangerous that even looking at them wrong could result in instant death. The sector was staffed by only the most experienced keepers, those who had survived at least a decade in the business. Marcus, at 28 standard years old and with only 3 years of experience, had no business being there. But the Croaxian supervisor, Crix 9, had specifically requested him. Not because Marcus was particularly skilled or experienced, but because he was expendable. The zoo had just acquired a new specimen, and they needed someone to test its temperament. If the creature killed Marcus, well, humans were cheap to replace. The Terran government practically gave them away to anyone willing to take them off their hands. The creature in question was a Zorathi lion, one of the most feared predators in the galaxy. Standing 12 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing over 3 tons, these beasts were known for their intelligence, their pack hunting strategies, and their particular hatred of all other sentient species. Their home world had been destroyed in a stellar collapse 50 years ago, and the few remaining Zorathi lions had become even more aggressive and territorial. This particular specimen had been captured after it single-handedly destroyed a mining operation on Titan 7. It had stalked and killed 17 miners over the course of 3 months, learning their patrol patterns, their equipment, even their shift changes. The creature was not just a predator. It was a strategic genius with a personal vendetta against anyone who wasn't a Zorathi lion. The beast sat in the center of its enclosure, a massive transparent dome that could withstand nuclear blasts. Its fur was a deep black with crimson stripes that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows across its face tracked every movement outside the dome, and its twin tails lashed back and forth like whips tipped with bone spikes. When it breathed, small flames leaked from its nostrils, and the temperature inside the dome was a constant 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Marcus stood outside the dome, reading the creature's file on his tablet, while other staff members watched from a safe distance. The Zorathi lion had been in captivity for 2 weeks and had refused all food. It had killed the previous 3 keepers who had attempted to enter its domain, crushing one with its jaws, impaling another with its tail spikes, and simply burning the third to ash with its breath. The zoo's management was considering having it destroyed before it died of starvation and became a total loss. You understand the protocol? Human Marcus, Crix 9 chittered through his translator. The Croaxian shell was a nervous brown color, indicating his anxiety about the situation. You are to enter the enclosure, place the food containers in the designated area, and exit immediately. Do not attempt communication. Do not make eye contact for more than 3 seconds. Do not show fear, but do not show aggression either. The creature can smell emotions, and it particularly hates fear and challenge in equal measure. Marcus nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on the magnificent beast. There was something in its posture, something in the way it held its head, that reminded him of the big cats back on Earth. Not the tame ones in the old zoos, but the wild ones he had worked with in the African preserves before joining the space program. This wasn't just rage and bloodlust, this was grief. The Zarathi lion was the last of its kind, trapped in a cage, being stared at by creatures it considered inferior. It wasn't trying to escape or establish dominance. It was mourning, and it had decided to die with what dignity it could maintain. The refusal to eat wasn't stubbornness, it was suicide. "Sir," Marcus said quietly, not taking his eyes off the creature. "Has anyone tried actually talking to it?" Crick's nine's shell shifted to a shocked yellow. "Talk to it?" "Human, Marcus. This creature has the intelligence of a tactical computer and the temperament of a solar flare. It doesn't want conversation. It wants to kill everything that moves and then die gloriously in battle." "Maybe," Marcus said, setting down his tablet and moving toward the enclosure's airlock. "Or maybe it just wants someone to acknowledge that it exists as more than just a dangerous animal." The other staff members began backing away as Marcus entered the airlock. The Zarathi lion's 6 eyes locked onto him immediately, and the temperature reading on the external monitors began climbing. The creature rose to its feet, all 12 feet of height, and 3 tons of muscle and fury, and let out a low rumble that made the station's hull vibrate. Marcus cycled through the airlock and stepped into the dome. The heat hit him like a wall, and the air was so thick with the scent of sulfur and musk that he could barely breathe. The Zarathi lion stood 30 feet away, watching him with the cold calculation of a born killer. For a long moment, neither moved. The creature's eyes studied Marcus from head to foot, cataloging his weaknesses, planning its attack. Marcus could feel the weight of that gaze, the intelligence behind it, the absolute certainty that he was about to die. Instead of approaching the feeding station, Marcus did something that made every watching staff member's blood freeze. He sat down on the floor, crossed his legs, and began to speak. "I know you can understand me," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I know you're intelligent enough to have learned our languages during your capture and transport. I also know you're not eating because you decided to die, and I can't say I blame you." The Zarathi lion's rumbling stopped abruptly. Its head tilted slightly, as if trying to process this unexpected development. "I've read your file," Marcus continued, sweat already streaming down his face from the heat. "You're the last one. Your whole species gone. Your world destroyed. Everyone you ever knew dead. And now you're in a cage being gawked at by a bunch of aliens who see you as nothing more than an exhibit." The creature took a step forward, its massive claws clicking against the metal floor. The movement was predatory but curious, like a cat investigating something that didn't fit its understanding of the world. "I worked with big cats back on Earth," Marcus said, his voice growing softer. "Lions, tigers, leopards. They were endangered too, though not as badly as you. And I learned something about predators, about apex species. You don't just hunt to eat. You hunt to maintain order, to keep the ecosystem balanced. You're not just killers, you're guardians." Another step forward. The Zarathi lion was now close enough that Marcus could see the individual scales around its eyes, could feel the heat radiating from its body like a furnace. One swipe of those claws would end him instantly. "But there's nothing left to guard, is there?" Marcus whispered. "No territory to protect, no pride to lead, no young ones to teach. Just this cage, and a bunch of strangers who want to watch you pace back and forth until you die." The great beast lowered its head until it was level with Marcus's face. 6 burning eyes stared into his 2 brown ones, and Marcus could smell the sulfur on its breath, could see the intelligence burning behind those alien pupils. For several heartbeats, the only sound was the creature's rumbling breath and the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Then, slowly, carefully, Marcus extended his hand. The movement caused an immediate reaction. The Zarathi lion's lips pulled back to reveal teeth like obsidian daggers, and a sound like tearing metal erupted from its throat. Outside the dome, alarms began blaring as the staff realized they were about to witness a human spectacular death. But Marcus didn't pull his hand back. He kept it extended, palm up, in the universal gesture of peaceful greeting that every sentient species seemed to understand. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said simply. "I'm here to see you. Not the dangerous predator, not the exotic exhibit, not the last of a dead species. Just you, individual, intelligent, deserving of respect, and dignity regardless of your circumstances. The Zarathi lion's snarl faltered. Its eyes flicked from Marcus's face to his extended hand and back again. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of impossible possibility. Finally, with a movement so gentle it seemed impossible from such a massive creature, the Zarathi lion touched the tip of one claw to Marcus's palm. The contact lasted only a second before the beast pulled back, but in that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. Marcus slowly stood up, his movements careful and non-threatening. "I'm going to come back tomorrow," he said quietly. "And the day after that. Not to feed you, or clean your cage, or study your behavior. Just to sit with you if you'll let me. Because no one should have to be alone at the end." He backed toward the airlock, never taking his eyes off the creature. The Zarathi lion watched him go, its posture no longer aggressive, but thoughtful, as if it were contemplating a puzzle it had never encountered before. As Marcus exited the dome, and the airlock sealed behind him, he could hear the excited chittering and buzzing of the other staff members. They were amazed that he had survived, that he had made contact, that he had seemingly communicated with the most dangerous predator in known space. But Marcus wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the look in those 6 eyes, the intelligence and sadness and desperate loneliness that had recognized something similar in him. He was thinking about tomorrow and the day after that and all the small moments that might add up to something neither of them had expected to find. In the dome behind him, the Zarathi lion settled back onto its haunches and did something it hadn't done since its capture. It closed its eyes and allowed itself to rest, no longer constantly vigilant against attack. For the first time in weeks, it felt something other than rage and despair. It felt curious about what the strange, fragile creature would do next. Hashtag the human zookeeper. Part 2. Marcus returned to Sector 7 the next morning carrying something that made his supervisor's shell turn a worried orange. Instead of the standard feeding equipment and safety gear, he had a simple folding chair and a thermos of coffee. The other staff members whispered among themselves as he passed, their various forms of communication creating a babble of clicks, whistles, and electronic tones. Word of yesterday's encounter had spread throughout the station overnight. Marcus Chun, the expendable human, had made contact with the Zarathi lion and lived. More than that, he had somehow calmed the creature enough that it had actually slept through the night instead of pacing its enclosure in endless, rage-fueled circles. The zoo's administration was baffled. Dr. Vexhai, the Zephyrian head of xenobiology, had run the security recordings through every analysis program available. The data made no sense. Humans had no telepathic abilities, no pheromone communication systems, no electromagnetic field manipulation. By all known science, Marcus should have been reduced to component atoms the moment he entered the dome. Yet there he was, setting up his chair outside the Zarathi lion's enclosure like he was planning to read the morning news. Human Marcus, Crix, 9 chittered nervously, his translator crackling with static. The administration requires a full report on your interaction methodology. The Department of Xenopsychology has requested detailed brain scans, and the Galactic Safety Commission wants to interview you about possible violations of containment protocols. Marcus settled into his chair and unscrewed the cap of his thermos, breathing in the rich aroma of real earth coffee, one of the few luxuries he allowed himself on his modest salary. "Tell them I'll file a report after my shift. Right now, I have work to do." "Work?" Crix 9's shell cycled through several confused colors. "But you're just sitting there." "Sometimes sitting is the hardest work of all," Marcus replied, taking a sip of his coffee. "Especially when you're sitting with someone who's forgotten how to trust." Inside the dome, the Zarathi lion emerged from the shelter area where it had spent the night. The creature looked different somehow, less coiled with rage, more alert but calm. It spotted Marcus immediately and approached the transparent wall, its 6 eyes studying him with intense curiosity. Marcus raised his thermos in a casual greeting. "Good morning, friend. I brought coffee, but I'm guessing sulfur-based biochemistry doesn't handle caffeine very well." The great beast tilted its head, a gesture so cat-like it would have been adorable if not for the fact that the creature could melt steel with its breath. It settled into a sitting position that mirrored Marcus's relaxed posture, and for several minutes, They simply observed each other in comfortable silence. This peaceful tableau was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. HFY, whose electric blue form crackled with excitement. The Zephyrian scientist moved in quick, jerky motions that spoke of barely contained energy and scientific curiosity run wild. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Dr. HFY buzzed, his translation implant struggling to keep up with his rapid speech. Human Marcus, you must tell me, what frequency are you broadcasting on? What pheromone cocktail are you using? The creature's stress indicators have dropped by 60% since yesterday. Marcus glanced up from his coffee. I'm not broadcasting anything. Document. I'm just sitting here being human. Impossible. Xenopsychological interaction requires specific protocols, established communication matrices, careful pheromone management. You cannot simply sit here being human and achieve therapeutic results with an apex predator. The Zarathi lion's ears flattened against its skull at the scientist's agitated buzzing. Its lips pulled back slightly, revealing the tips of those obsidian fangs, and the temperature reading on the enclosure monitors began climbing. Doc, Marcus said quietly, you're upsetting my friend. Dr. HFY's electrical field flickered in confusion. You're a friend? Human Marcus, that is not a friend. That is a Class X hostile xenomorph with confirmed sapience and documented genocidal tendencies. It is not capable of friendship as understood by social species. Really? Marcus stood slowly and approached the dome wall. The Zarathi lion rose as well, moving to mirror his position on the other side of the transparent barrier. Then, explain this. What happened next would be discussed in xenobiological circles for decades to come. Marcus placed his palm flat against the dome surface, and, after a moment's hesitation, the Zarathi lion raised its massive paw and pressed it against the same spot on its side of the barrier. The size difference was staggering. Marcus's entire hand was smaller than one of the creature's claw sheaths, but the gesture was unmistakable. Dr. HFY's electrical discharge was visible as his entire worldview restructured itself around this impossible observation. But the aggression matrices, the territorial imperatives, the confirmed psychological profile indicates that someone who's lost everything they ever cared about might be angry and defensive. Marcus asked, not taking his eyes off the Zarathi lion. Doc, you're applying animal psychology to a sapient being. This isn't a beast driven by instinct. This is a person dealing with grief. The great creature's 6 eyes blinked slowly, a gesture that somehow conveyed both gratitude and exhaustion. It held the contact for several more seconds before padding back to its resting area, but not before making a sound that was definitely not a threatening growl. It was more like a purr, if purrs could be made by creatures with vocal cords designed for roaring across continents. Over the following hours, other staff members found excuses to visit Sector 7. They came expecting to see the human doing something dramatic or dangerous, but instead found him simply existing peacefully in proximity to the most feared predator in known space. He read reports on his tablet, finished his coffee, and occasionally made quiet observations about the weather or the interesting design of the station's ventilation system. The Zarathi lion seemed content to listen. It had positioned itself where it could see Marcus clearly, and while it didn't respond to his casual chatter, its posture remained relaxed and attentive. For a creature that had been in a constant state of hypervigilance since its capture, this behavioral shift was nothing short of revolutionary. Around midday, something unprecedented happened. A junior keeper, a young Nethys named Zura, 8, was delivering food containers to the neighboring enclosures when she accidentally dropped a crate. The metallic crash echoed through Sector 7 like a gunshot, and every creature in the area immediately went into defensive mode. Except the Zarathi lion. Instead of roaring or breathing fire or launching itself at the dome wall in aggressive display, the great beast simply looked toward the sound, assessed that it posed no threat, and then looked back at Marcus with what could only be described as mild amusement. Did it just shrug? Zara, 8 whispered in amazement. I think it did, Marcus replied, grinning. I think it started to understand that not everything is a threat to be eliminated. This observation proved prophetic as the day progressed. The Zarathi lion's behavior continued to moderate in ways that defied every predictive model the zoo's computers could generate. It showed interest in its surroundings rather than just scanning for enemies. It investigated the enrichment items that had been placed in its enclosure, but ignored for weeks. Most surprisingly, when feeding time arrived, it actually approached the food containers instead of leaving them untouched. The creature didn't eat much, just enough to sustain itself rather than the ravenous consumption typical of its species. But the symbolic significance was enormous. It was choosing to live, at least for now. As Marcus's shift neared its end, he began the process of saying goodbye, something that felt both natural and surreal. How do you bid farewell to an alien apex predator that has apparently decided you're worth tolerating? I'll see you tomorrow, he told the creature, folding up his chair. Same time, same spot. I've got some stories about Earth cats that you might find interesting. The Zarathi lion watched him prepare to leave, and then did something that made every monitoring device in Sector 7 register simultaneous alerts. It approached the dome wall and lowered its great head until it was resting against a transparent surface, directly in front of where Marcus stood. The gesture was unmistakable across any cultural boundary. It was a goodbye, tinged with something that might have been affection or at least appreciation. Marcus reached out and placed his palm against the dome one more time, directly over the creature's forehead. Rest well, friend. Tomorrow we'll work on getting you something better than synthetic meat paste. As he walked away, Marcus could feel the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. Alien staff members trying to process what they had witnessed. A human had somehow formed a bond with a creature that was supposed to be incapable of bonding. A fragile, short-lived species had reached across the vast gulf of biology and psychology to touch something that was fundamentally other. Behind him, the Zarathi lion settled down for another peaceful night's sleep. For the second time since its capture, it felt something other than rage or despair. It felt anticipation for tomorrow, and for the strange, brave little creature who had chosen to see it as more than just a monster. In the administrative offices high above Sector 7, emergency meetings were being called. The implications of Marcus's success were staggering. If a human could form a therapeutic bond with a Zarathi lion, what did that say about human psychology? What did it suggest about their potential role in interspecies relations? But Marcus wasn't thinking about implications or potential. He was thinking about tomorrow's coffee and the stories he could tell about the great cats of Earth and the way 6 alien eyes had looked at him with something that transcended species boundaries. He was thinking about friendship in its purest form, the recognition of one conscious being by another, regardless of shape or origin or the vast darkness between stars. Hashtag the human zookeeper. Part 3, the third day, brought unwelcome visitors to Sector 7. Marcus arrived for his morning routine to find a delegation of officials from the Galactic Xenobiological Institute waiting outside the Zarathi lion's enclosure. Their presence filled the corridor with a symphony of clicks, buzzes, and electronic tones as various species argued in their native languages. Leading the group was Administrator Kelthara, a towering Altarian whose crystalline form refracted the corridor, lighting into rainbow patterns. Her species was known for their rigid adherence to protocol and their complete inability to understand concepts like intuition or emotional connection. To Kelthara, the universe was a series of measurable variables that could be controlled through proper application of scientific method. Human Marcus Chun. Her voice resonated like wind chimes in a storm. You will submit to immediate neurological examination and provide complete documentation of your interaction protocols. This facility cannot operate outside established safety parameters. Marcus set down his chair and thermos, noting that the Zarathi lion had emerged from its shelter area and was watching the gathering with obvious interest. The creature's posture had shifted from the relaxed stance it had adopted over the past 2 days to something more alert and potentially dangerous. Good morning to you too, Administrator, Marcus replied calmly. I'm afraid I don't have any protocols to document. I'll just sit here and talk to my friend. The collection of officials exploded into agitated communication. Dr. Vexhi's electrical field crackled with frustrated energy, while Crix 9's shell cycled rapidly through colors that indicated extreme stress. A Zephyrian tactical analyst began running probability calculations so rapidly that her implants overheated and started smoking. Impossible, Administrator Kelthera declared. Xenopsychological integration requires specific methodologies based on comprehensive behavioral analysis and carefully controlled environmental variables. You cannot achieve measured results through random social interaction. And yet, Marcus said, settling into his chair, here we are. Inside the dome, the Zarathi lion had begun to pace. Its 6 eyes tracked the officials outside its enclosure, and the temperature readings were climbing steadily. The creature's tail lashed back and forth, and small puffs of flame leaked from its nostrils. It was clear that the presence of so many strangers was triggering its defensive instincts. Marcus noticed the change immediately. Everyone needs to step back, he said quietly. You're making him nervous. Nervous? Dr. Vexhai buzzed indignantly. It's a Zarathi lion. It doesn't get nervous. It gets homicidal. As if to prove the doctor's point, the creature suddenly roared. The sound was deafening even through the dome's sound-dampening systems, and every person in the corridor instinctively backed away from the transparent barrier. The Zarathi lion's muscles bunched as it prepared to charge, its attention fixed on the cluster of officials who had dared to invade its territory. Except its charge never came. Instead, it stopped mid-stride and looked at Marcus, who had stood up from his chair and was approaching the dome wall with his hands raised in a calming gesture. Easy, friend, Marcus said softly, his voice somehow carrying through the chaos of alarm systems and panicked officials. They're just visitors. They don't understand that this is your space. The great beast's 6 eyes locked onto Marcus's face, and gradually, the tension began to drain from its massive frame. The roaring subsided to a low rumble, then faded entirely. The creature settled back onto its haunches, though its gaze remained fixed on the officials with obvious wariness. Administrator Kelthera's crystalline form flickered through several different colors before settling on a pale blue that indicated confused analysis. That should not be possible. The creature was in full aggressive display mode. Standard protocol requires immediate sedation and isolation procedures. Standard protocol, Marcus replied, returning to his chair, assumes you're dealing with an animal instead of a person. He's not attacking because he understands that I'm here as a mediator, not a threat. Mediator? The word seemed to cause physical pain to several of the officials. Human Marcus, you are a Class D maintenance worker with minimal xenobiological training. You cannot serve as a mediator between this facility and a Class X hostile entity. Marcus took a sip of his coffee and regarded the delegation with the same calm attention he gave to the Zarathi lion. Then, what would you call what just happened? I asked him to calm down, and he did. Seems like mediation to me. The argument that followed was intense enough to trigger station-wide noise complaints. Officials shouted, buzzed, clicked, and chimed in 17 different languages while their translation implants worked overtime to keep up with the chaos. The central point of contention was simple. Humans weren't supposed to be capable of interspecies psychological intervention, especially not with apex predators. Throughout the debate, Marcus continued his quiet routine. He read reports on his tablet, finished his coffee, and occasionally made observations to the Zarathi lion about the amusing behavior of bureaucrats. The creature seemed to find his commentary entertaining, making those rumbling sounds that were becoming increasingly recognizable as laughter. The breakthrough came when Dr. Ythera, an elderly Centaurian psychologist, separated herself from the arguing group and approached Marcus's position. Her species was known for their empathic abilities and their deep understanding of emotional complexities across different forms of consciousness. "May I sit with you?" she asked in her melodious voice, gesturing toward the area near Marcus's chair. Marcus nodded, and Dr. Ythera settled onto the floor with the fluid grace typical of her kind. Her presence seemed to have a calming effect on both Marcus and the Zarathi lion, who regarded her with curious but non-hostile attention. "I have been studying the security recordings," she said quietly, speaking just loudly enough for Marcus to hear over the ongoing argument. "What you're doing, it is not unique to humans, but it is rare among any species." "What am I doing exactly?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "You are practicing radical acceptance," Dr. Ythera replied. You see this creature not as what it has done or what it might do, but as what it is in this moment. You offer presence without expectation, companionship without demand. It is a form of emotional alchemy that we see occasionally in the most gifted healers. Marcus considered this. I just see someone who's been through hell and doesn't want to be alone anymore. Exactly. Dr. Euthera's forearms gestured gracefully as she spoke. Your species has a phrase, to see the forest for the trees. Most of us see this creature's teeth, its claws, its capacity for destruction. You see its grief, its intelligence, its need for connection. It is a perspective that transcends species boundaries. The Zarathi lion had been listening to their conversation with obvious interest. Now it approached the dome wall and settled into its now familiar position, watching both the human and the centaurian with what could only be described as approval. He likes you, Marcus observed. That's rare. He's been pretty selective about who gets his attention. Dr. Euthera's expression, what passed for an expression on her alien features, conveyed both pleasure and professional fascination. The feeling is mutual. There's a depth to this consciousness that we have greatly underestimated. Her statement proved prophetic when the Zarathi lion did something that silenced the arguing officials instantly. It began to speak, not in its own language. The few recovered recordings from its homeworld suggested that Zarathi communication involved complex harmonics beyond most species' hearing range. Instead, it spoke in perfectly accented galactic standard, its voice a deep rumble that seemed to emerge from some vast cavern. The small flesh one speaks truth, it said, each word carefully enunciated. I am Kethvar, last son of the burning plains, keeper of the 7 sacred haunts. I choose to live because the small flesh one sees honor in living. I choose to speak because silence serves no purpose when words might build understanding. The silence that followed was so profound that the station's environmental systems seemed unnaturally loud. Every official, every scientist, every staff member stood frozen as they processed the implications of what they had just heard. Marcus was the first to recover. He stood and approached the dome, placing his palm against the surface in the gesture that had become their standard greeting. Hello, Ketvar. It's good to finally know your name. I am Marcus. The great creature, Ketvar, pressed his paw against the opposite side of the barrier. Marcus, friend, he said, the alien attempt at human naming conventions somehow endearing. You have given me reason to remember who I was before grief consumed my purpose. Dr. Euthera's empathic abilities were clearly overwhelmed by the emotional resonance of the moment. Her forearms trembled as she struggled to process the depth of connection between human and Zarathi. This is unprecedented. The psychological barriers between your species should make this level of communication impossible. Maybe, Marcus said without taking his eyes off Kethvar, we've been thinking about barriers all wrong. Maybe they're not walls to keep us apart. Maybe they're just challenges to overcome. Kethvar's 6 eyes blinked slowly, and what Marcus had learned was an expression of contentment. Marcus' friend speaks, as the wise mothers once spoke, when the burning plains were green and my people sang to the moons. You understand that difference is not division. Administrator Kelthara's crystalline form was cycling through colors so rapidly that it was difficult to look at her directly. This changes everything. If successful interspecies psychological intervention is possible through simple emotional connection rather than complex technological mediation, then maybe, Dr. Euthera suggested gently, we need to reconsider our entire approach to xenopsychology. Perhaps the most sophisticated tool for understanding alien consciousness isn't technology, it's compassion. As the officials began to process the implications of what they had witnessed, Marcus and Kethvar continued their quiet communion. They had moved beyond the basic establishment of trust into something deeper, a genuine friendship that transcended the vast differences between their species. Tomorrow, Marcus said as a shift neared its end, I'll bring some pictures of Earth. I think you'd like to see what our great cats look like. I would be honored, Kethvar replied. And perhaps I could tell you stories of the burning plains, when the Zarathi ran beneath 7 moons, and the world sang with our voices. As Marcus prepared to leave, he noticed that the crowd of officials had doubled in size. Word was spreading throughout the station, throughout the fleet, throughout the galaxy. A human zookeeper had made friends with a Zorathi lion, and in doing so, had opened a door that many had believed would remain forever closed. But Marcus wasn't thinking about history or implications or the bureaucratic storm that was sure to follow. He was thinking about tomorrow's stories and the sound of alien laughter and the simple miracle of two very different beings choosing to see each other as friends. Behind him, Kethvar settled down for another peaceful night, but not before speaking one more time. Marcus, friend, thank you for helping me remember that I am more than my grief. The words echoed through Sector 7 long after Marcus had gone home, a promise of healing that would ripple across the stars. Hashtag the human zookeeper. Part for the morning of the fourth day brought chaos to Kepler Station. Marcus arrived at Sector 7 to find his usual route blocked by a throng of reporters, scientists, and curiosity seekers from across the galaxy. News of the speaking Zorathi lion had spread through the galactic communication networks overnight, and every major media outlet wanted an exclusive interview with a human who had somehow achieved the impossible. Marcus Chun, a Andromedan reporter thrust a microphone-shaped device toward his face while her tentacles operated 3 different recording instruments simultaneously. How does it feel to be the first human to establish meaningful communication with a Class X predator? Are you working for the Human Colonization Authority? Demanded a Rigelian journalist whose crystalline form sparked with excitement. Is this part of some secret program to weaponize human empathy? What's your secret? Buzzed a Zephyrian whose electrical field kept interfering with everyone else's equipment. Are you using some kind of pheromone enhancement? Neural implants? Télépathique augmentation. Marcus pushed through the crowd with practiced ease, having dealt with similar chaos during his time in the Earth Wildlife Preserves. No comment, and no, I'm just a guy who likes cats. The mob followed him all the way to Kethvar's enclosure, where they pressed against the observation barriers like water, finding every available space. The noise was tremendous, a cacophony of different languages, recording equipment, and excited commentary that echoed through the corridors of Sector 7. Inside his dome, Kethvar was not handling the attention well. The great creature paced in tight circles, his temperature readings climbing dangerously high as his stress level spiked. His 6 eyes darted constantly between the mass of strangers, and small jets of flame escaped his nostrils with each agitated breath. Marcus could see that his friend was approaching a breaking point. Zorathi lions were apex predators who had evolved to control vast territories with minimal intrusion from other species. Being surrounded by crowds of gawking aliens was probably triggering every aggressive instinct the creature possessed. Everyone needs to leave, Marcus announced loudly, his voice cutting through the chaos. Now! The mob's response was predictably negative. Reporters shouted questions about freedom of information, scientists claimed research priority, and several administrative officials began citing regulations about public access to government facilities. That's when Kethvar roared. The sound was unlike anything he had produced before, not the controlled demonstration of power from the previous day, but a full-throated expression of territorial rage that seemed to shake the very foundations of the station. The dome's transparent walls actually flexed under the acoustic pressure, and several people's recording devices exploded from overload. In the sudden, ringing silence that followed, Marcus walked calmly to his chair and sat down. Last warning, he said quietly. My friend doesn't like crowds. The crowd began backing away, but not quickly enough. Kethvar had fixated on a particular group of Terran military officials who were attempting to take detailed measurements of the enclosure. His lips pulled back to reveal those obsidian fangs, and the air around him began to shimmer with heat distortion as his internal temperature spiked beyond safe levels. Kethvar, Marcus called softly, not standing up or making any sudden movements. Look at me, friend. Focus on my voice. 6 burning eyes swiveled to lock on Marcus's face. The great creature's ears were flat against his skull, and his muscles were bunched for attack. For a moment, it looked as though 3 tons of furious apex predator were about to attempt to break through a barrier designed to withstand nuclear blasts. Tell me about the burning plains, Marcus said, his voice steady and calm despite the obvious danger. Tell me about the 7 moons and the songs your people used to sing. Kethvar froze mid-stride, his attention completely captured by Marcus's words. Gradually, the tension began to drain from his massive frame. The shimmer of heat around him faded as his temperature dropped back to normal levels. "The burning plains," Kethvar said slowly, his voice distant with memory. "Where the grass grew red as blood and tall as trees, where the wind carried the scents of 1,000 different hunts." As he spoke, the crowd began to disperse. Something about the alien's voice, the weight of loss and longing in it, seemed to drive home the reality of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a dangerous animal performing tricks. This was a sapient being sharing memories of a dead world, finding solace in the presence of an unlikely friend. Within an hour, Sector 7 had returned to its normal quiet operation. Only a few essential staff remained, along with Dr. Yathera, who had established herself as something of an interpreter between the various official delegations and Marcus's increasingly unorthodox methods. "You handle that well," she observed, settling into her usual position on the floor near Marcus's chair. "Though I suspect this is only the beginning. The Galactic Council has called an emergency session to discuss the implications of successful human-Zarathi communication." Marcus sighed and pulled out his tablet, preparing for another day of routine reports interrupted by bureaucratic chaos. "I just want to sit with my friend and maybe teach him some Earth card games. Is that too much to ask?" Apparently, Dr. Yathera replied with what passed for humor in her species. "Your friendship has triggered a paradigm shift in xenopsychology. There are research proposals being submitted to study the Chun effect on human-alien relations." "The Chun effect?" Marcus looked up from his tablet with a mixture of amusement and dismay. "They're naming things after me now. Fame is a burden your species seems particularly ill-equipped to handle," Kethvar observed, having listened to their conversation with obvious interest. "On my world, the wise mothers taught that recognition should come from deeds, not words about deeds." "Smart mothers," Marcus replied. "How did they decide who got recognized for what?" This question seemed to please Kethvar enormously. His tail, which had been lashing with agitation, settled into the relaxed position Marcus had learned indicated contentment. "There was a ritual," he said, settling into his favorite storytelling posture. "When the moons aligned in the sacred pattern, the hunters would gather in a great circle, and each would speak of their truest hunt." "Truest hunt?" Dr. Yathera asked, her empathic abilities picking up the emotional resonance of the memory. "What made a hunt true versus false?" Kethvar's 6 eyes blinked slowly as he considered how to explain an alien concept in terms his listeners could understand. "A false hunt is taken for glory, for status, to prove strength to others. A true hunt is taken for need, to protect, to provide, to maintain the balance that keeps the world whole." The wise mothers could always tell the difference. Marcus found himself thinking about his own motivations for coming to Sector 7 each day. Was it a true hunt or a false one? He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone, wasn't seeking recognition or advancement. He came because Kethvar needed a friend, and because leaving someone alone in their grief felt fundamentally wrong. "I think," he said quietly, "your wise mothers would have liked humans. We're pretty good at recognizing true hunts when we see them." "Perhaps that is why you see me as friend rather than monster," Kethvar replied. "Your hunt is true. You seek nothing but companionship freely given." Their philosophical discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Administrator Kelthara, whose crystalline form was cycling through colors that indicated extreme urgency. Behind her came a figure that made Marcus's blood run cold. General Thaxron of the Galactic Defense Force, whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was legendary throughout known space. Human Marcus Chun. The general's mechanical voice synthesizer stripped all emotion from his words. "You will accompany me for immediate debriefing. The Zarathi specimen will be transferred to a more secure facility pending complete psychological evaluation." Kethvar's reaction was immediate and terrifying. He rose to his full height, flames streaming from his nostrils as he faced down the general through the dome's barrier. "No," he said, the single word carrying the weight of absolute refusal. "Marcus Friend stays. I go nowhere without Marcus Friend." General Thaxron's mechanical appendages clicked together in what passed for a dismissive gesture among his species. "The specimen's preferences are irrelevant. This facility is not equipped for the security requirements necessitated by a speaking Zarathi. Then upgrade the facility, Marcus said, standing up from his chair. Kethvar isn't a specimen. He's a person. And he's not going anywhere he doesn't want to go. You misunderstand your authority in this situation, Humanshin. The Zarathi entity represents both an unprecedented opportunity and a potential threat. It will be studied under controlled conditions by qualified xenopsychologists. Dr. Yithera rose gracefully to her feet, her forearms weaving complex patterns that indicated formal challenge among her people. With respect, General, this creature has demonstrated clear signs of psychological trauma and is showing significant improvement under current therapeutic conditions. Removing him from his established support structure would be contraindicated from a medical standpoint. Medical. General Thaxron's optical sensors focused on the Centaurian with mechanical precision. This is not a medical situation, Doctor. This is a security matter involving the first successful communication with a Zarathi in 50 years. And what do you plan to learn from him? Marcus asked, his voice carrying an edge that made several of the officials step back nervously. How to kill his people more efficiently. His world is gone. His species is extinct. What possible military intelligence could he provide? That is classified information, Humanshin. Kethvar had been following the conversation with growing agitation, his temperature readings climbing steadily. Now he spoke again, his voice carrying a rumble that seemed to emerge from the depths of the planet itself. I know what you seek, Metal Speaker, he said, addressing General Thaxron directly. You wish to know how we fought, how we killed, how we burned worlds to ash in our rage. You think Marcus' friend has unlocked some secret of Zarathi warcraft. The General's optical sensors fixed on the great creature with obvious interest. The Zarathi campaign remains the most devastating military action in recorded galactic history. Understanding your tactical methodologies could prevent similar conflicts in the future. Kethvar's laugh was like distant thunder. Fool, you understand nothing. We did not fight because we were strong. We fought because we were dying. Our world burned because we had forgotten the songs of peace, forgotten the wisdom of the wise mothers. We became monsters because we chose to see only monsters in others. He turned away from the General and focused his 6 eyes on Marcus. Marcus' friend sees no monster in me. Therefore, I remember that I am not a monster. This is the only truth worth learning. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across light years. General Thaxron's mechanical form remained motionless as he processed this information, while Administrator Kelthara's crystalline structure flickered through confused patterns of light. Finally, Dr. Yithera spoke. General, I formally request that Kethvar remain under current therapeutic care. The psychological progress he has made in just 4 days represents a breakthrough in interspecies trauma recovery. Disrupting this process could cause irreversible psychological damage. And if he becomes violent again? If this therapeutic progress proves unstable? Marcus looked up at the towering alien general with the same calm confidence he had shown Kethvar on that first day. Then, I'll be here to help him remember who he chooses to be instead of who grief tried to make him. For a long moment, the fate of an unprecedented friendship hung in the balance, weighed against military necessity and bureaucratic protocol. Then, Kethvar spoke one more time, his voice soft but carrying absolute conviction. Marcus' friend has given me reason to hope that not all species see us as monsters to be caged or weapons to be studied. If you take him from me, you will prove that hope was false, and I will have no reason to remain peaceful. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. General Thaxron's sensors analyzed the creature's body language, stress levels, and biochemical output. The data was clear. Removing Marcus would likely trigger a complete psychological breakdown, returning Kethvar to his previous state of homicidal rage. Very well, the general said finally. The current arrangement will continue, pending daily evaluation. But, Humanshin, you are now responsible for the psychological stability of the most dangerous predator in known space. Do not take that responsibility lightly. As the officials departed, leaving Marcus and Kethvar alone except for the ever-present Dr. Yithera, the great creature settled back into his resting position with obvious relief. Thank you, Marcus friend, he said quietly. for helping me remember that I have choices. That's what friends do, Marcus replied, settling back into his chair. Now, how about those stories about the 7 moons? I got all day. Hashtag the human zookeeper. Part 5. 6 months after their first meeting, Marcus Chin stood before the Galactic Council's emergency assembly, representing not just himself or even humanity, but a fundamental shift in how conscious beings related to one another across the vast reaches of space. The great chamber hummed with the voices of 1,000 species as delegates debated the most significant xenopsychological development in recorded history. The issue on the table was simple in concept, but revolutionary in implication. Ketvar had formally requested asylum not as a refugee or a prisoner, but as an individual seeking citizenship in a galactic federation. It was the first such request ever made by a Zorathi, and the legal, ethical, and political ramifications were staggering. More importantly, Ketvar had requested that Marcus Chun serve as his advocate and cultural interpreter. The human Chin claims announced the crystalline speaker whose form served as the assembly's neutral moderator, that standard psychological evaluation protocols are insufficient to assess Zorathi consciousness due to fundamental misconceptions about the nature of their social structures. Marcus stood at the speaker's podium, acutely aware that his words would be transmitted across the galaxy and studied by xenopsychologists for generations. Behind him, a massive holographic display showed Ketvar in his enclosure, though enclosure was no longer an accurate description. Over the past months, the Zorathi's living space had been expanded into a full habitat complete with environmental controls that mimicked the burning plains of his lost homeworld. Honorable delegates, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. We've been approaching Zorathi psychology from the wrong direction. We assumed that their legendary aggression was a species-wide trait, a biological imperative that made them inherently violent. But Ketvar has taught us that their aggression was a symptom, not a cause. Murmurs rippled through the assembly as delegates conferred with their advisors. The Andromedan representative raised a tentacle to request permission to speak. Human Chun, she said, her voice harmonizing across multiple frequencies. The historical record clearly shows that Zorathi forces engaged in systematic destruction of civilian populations across 17 star systems. How do you reconcile this with your claims about their peaceful nature? Marcus had prepared for this question through countless conversations with Ketvar about his people's history. Delegate, imagine that your homeworld was dying, not from war or natural disaster, but from a slow environmental collapse that your people couldn't stop or understand. Imagine watching your children sicken and die while your leaders struggled desperately to find new homes for the survivors. The holographic display shifted to show archival footage from the Zorathi homeworld's final decades, images that had been classified until Ketvar provided the cultural context needed to understand them. Vast cities built around geothermal vents, massive agricultural complexes designed to work with the planet's unique ecosystem, art and architecture that spoke of a civilization that had thrived for millennia. The Zorathi didn't start as conquerors, Marcus continued. They started as refugees. But when they asked for help, when they sent diplomatic missions to nearby systems seeking aid or resettlement opportunities, they were turned away. The galaxy saw their size, their natural weapons, their strength, and decided they were too dangerous to help. Dr. Ythera, now serving as the official xenopsychological consultant for the case, rose from her position in the expert witness section. If I may expand on Advocate Chen's statement, she said, her melodious voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Zorathi psychology appears to be fundamentally based on what they call the sacred hunt, a complex social structure that requires them to serve as protectors and providers for their community. The display shifted again, showing recordings of Ketvar explaining Zorathi social dynamics through artwork he had created during his therapy sessions. The images were hauntingly beautiful, abstract representations of the hunt cycles, the seasonal migrations, the complex relationships between different Zorathi clans. When their world began dying, Dr. Ythera continued, the Zorathi faced an impossible situation. Their fundamental psychological drive was to protect their people, but they couldn't protect them from environmental collapse. When the galaxy refused to help, they had only one option left that fit their psychological framework. They had to hunt, Marcus said quietly. They had to become predators because that was the only way they knew how to save their families. The aggression we documented during the Zarathi campaign wasn't racial supremacy or territorial expansion. It was the death throes of a civilization that couldn't figure out how to ask for help in a way the galaxy would accept. The silence in the chamber was profound. Delegates who had lived through the Zarathi campaign, who had lost worlds and fleets to the seemingly unstoppable alien onslaught, struggled to reconcile this new understanding with their memories of devastation. The Rigelian military advisor was the first to break the silence. Even accepting your interpretation of Zarathi motivations, he said, his crystalline form sparking with agitation. The fact remains that they caused unprecedented destruction. How do we know that this individual won't revert to violent behavior? The answer came not from Marcus or Dr. Yathera, but from Kethvar himself. The great creature had been watching the proceedings through the chamber's communication link, and now his voice filled the assembly hall with the deep rumble that had become familiar to beings across the galaxy. Because, Kethvar said, I have found a new hunt. The display shifted once more, showing scenes from Sector 7 over the past months. Kethvar working with other endangered species, using his size and strength to help construct new habitats. Kethvar communicating with rescued creatures from across the galaxy, serving as an intermediary between traumatized beings and their caretakers. Kethvar teaching young alien children about the importance of protecting their environments. My people died because we forgot the wisdom of the wise mothers, Kethvar continued. We forgot that the strongest hunt is not to take life, but to preserve it. Marcus' friend reminded me of this truth. Now my hunt is to ensure that no species faces the choice mine did, to become monsters or watch their children die. Marcus felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the same feeling he had experienced on that first day when he chose to sit with a grieving alien instead of treating it as a dangerous animal. Kethvar has become the first Zarathi conservationist in recorded history, he told the assembly. He's not just asking for asylum. He's asking for the chance to dedicate his life to preventing the kind of ecological disasters that destroyed his world. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Military advisors argued about security risks, while xenobiologists presented data on Kethvar's psychological stability. Philosophers discussed the implications of granting citizenship to a member of an officially extinct species, while legal experts debated the precedent such a decision would set. Through it all, Marcus found himself thinking about that first day in Sector 7, about a lonely creature deciding whether to live or die, about the simple choice to offer companionship without expecting anything in return. Everything that followed, the media attention, the scientific breakthroughs, the political ramifications, seemed almost secondary to that basic moment of connection between two conscious beings. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than Marcus had hoped, but decisive enough to avoid further challenge. By a margin of just 67 votes out of more than 1,000 delegates, the Galactic Assembly approved Kethvar's request for asylum and citizenship. As the announcement echoed through the chamber, Marcus felt a hand, or the alien equivalent, touch his shoulder. Dr. Yathera had moved to stand beside him, her empathic abilities radiating a complex mixture of joy, relief, and profound satisfaction. You've done something remarkable, she said quietly, speaking just loudly enough for Marcus to hear over the post-vote chaos. You've changed the way the galaxy thinks about consciousness, about connection, about the possibility of redemption. Marcus shook his head, smiling despite his exhaustion. I didn't do anything special. I just made friends with someone who needed a friend. Perhaps, Dr. Yathera replied, that's the most special thing of all. Later that day, Marcus returned to Sector 7 for what would be the last time in an official capacity. Kethvar's new status meant he would be relocating to a conservation research facility where he could work with endangered species from across the galaxy. Their daily routine of coffee and conversation would be ending, though their friendship certainly wouldn't. So, Marcus said, settling into his chair for the final time, how does it feel to be a citizen of the galaxy? Kethvar's 6 eyes blinked slowly in the expression Marcus had learned indicated deep contentment. It feels like the end of a very long exile, he replied, and the beginning of a hunt that would have made the wise mothers proud. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars while slowly past the sector's observation windows. Finally, Kethvar spoke again. "Marcus, friend," he said, "there is something I must tell you before we part ways. Something the wise mothers taught about the truest hunts." "What's that?" "They taught that the hunter and the hunted are not always who they appear to be. Sometimes the predator is the one who needs saving, and sometimes the prey becomes the protector." Kethvar's massive head tilted as he regarded his human friend. "I thought I was teaching you about Zarathi culture, about our stories and our history, but you were teaching me something far more important." "What was I teaching you?" "You were teaching me that being the last of something doesn't mean being alone. That grief doesn't have to become hatred. That even the fiercest predator can choose to be gentle." Kethvar paused, choosing his words carefully. "You saved my life, Marcus, friend. Not from a zoo, not from the officials who wanted to study me. You saved me from myself." Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes, a very human response to emotion that Kethvar had learned to recognize and respect. "You saved mine too," he said quietly. "I came to that cage thinking I was just doing my job, just getting through another day. But you taught me that every conscious being deserves to be seen as an individual, not just as a member of their species." "Then, we are both successful hunters," Kethvar said, his voice carrying what Marcus had learned was the Zarathi equivalent of laughter. "We sought companionship and found friendship. We sought understanding and found wisdom. We sought redemption and found purpose." As Marcus prepared to leave Sector 7 for the last time, Kethvar approached the barrier one final time and pressed his massive paw against the surface. Marcus placed his palm against the opposite side, maintaining the gesture that had become their traditional greeting and farewell. "Until our paths cross again, Marcus, friend," Kethvar said formally. "Until our paths cross again, Kethvar, friend," Marcus replied. As Marcus walked away, he could hear Kethvar beginning to sing, a deep, harmonic sound that the Zarathi had traditionally used to mark important transitions in their lives. It was the first time in 50 years that such a song had been heard anywhere in the galaxy, and it spoke of hope renewed, of friendship transcending species boundaries, of the simple miracle that occurred whenever one conscious being chose to see another as worthy of respect and affection. The news reports that night would focus on the political implications, the scientific breakthroughs, the unprecedented nature of Kethvar's citizenship application. But those who had witnessed the daily routine in Sector 7 understood that the real story was much simpler and far more profound. It was the story of a lonely human who chose to sit with a grieving alien, of a traumatized predator who chose to trust again, of two very different beings who discovered that friendship could exist across any gulf of biology, culture, or circumstance. It was a story that would be told for generations among the stars, not as a tale of human exceptionalism or Zarathi redemption, but as proof that consciousness recognizes consciousness, that compassion transcends species boundaries, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act in the universe is simply choosing to care about someone different from yourself. In the years that followed, Kethvar would become one of the galaxy's most respected conservationists, helping to save dozens of endangered species from extinction. Marcus would continue his work with alien animals, eventually establishing the Chun Institute for Interspecies Communication. They would meet regularly, maintaining a friendship that would serve as a model for human-alien relations throughout known space. But on that final day in Sector 7, they were simply what they had always been, two friends saying goodbye, secure in the knowledge that some connections transcend time, distance, and the vast darkness between the stars.